Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. There's been a breaking news kind of release of a bunch of new little bits of information about Black Ops 4 Zombies, and one of the bits of info was about Zombies Rush, and I've made a separate video about that just because it's a little bit of a chunkier topic, so if you want to watch that breaking news about what this new competitive mode is in Zombies, then the link is up there and it's in the description down below. Today though, in this video, I'm going to be talking about all the rest of bits of information alongside that one bigger one about Zombie Rush, okay? So, first of all, Jason has done a little bit of talking about the Easter eggs in Black Ops 4, and one key sentence that I thought would be interesting for you guys to hear is that he says that Blood of the Dead, out of the Black Ops 4 Zombies maps, is one of the most involved main quests that we have. And he basically frames it as saying that the Blood of the Dead main quest, alongside being complex for the story, is also a bit of a challenge for the community. He's kind of setting it up in a way to say, okay, we've seen what you can do in the past, but can you beat this one? So Blood is meant to be a challenge, which is good to hear. I like the fact that they're trying to make things a little bit more difficult for us, but I have to stress, okay, I gotta say this real loud right now, if we're shooting rocks in any of those Easter egg steps, my PS4's going out the window, okay? If you're gonna make it more difficult with some silly, completely pointless Easter egg steps, Jason, then I'm uninstalling your game, bro. So, fingers crossed he gets it right this time and learns from his Revelations mistakes. That's what I'm hoping for. However, that's not everything he said about Blood of the Dead. He also says it's packed with side Easter egg quests as well. And then, straight away, he goes on to talk about Classified, and the way that he transitions between the two, in my opinion, is quite interesting, because he then says Classified is complex in a different sense, it's more for the gameplay, but then he kind of sounds like he's hearing what he's saying and not really liking it, and not liking the way it's sounding, and so he kind of goes back on his previous sentence and goes, oh yeah, if you can understand it, then you're a real Zombies OG, because it goes back even further. But what it sounded like to me, just from the way that he described it, is that Blood is in-depth for that Easter egg, and it's like a crazy hardcore quest. Whereas Classified, I don't think is going to be, or at least it didn't sound like it. It sounds like understanding why Classified is happening might take a little bit more background Zombies knowledge, but it didn't sound to me, from what I inferred, like Classified was going to be an in-depth Easter egg map. Now, that would make sense, seeing as it's basically just a copy of The Giant, but for 5 instead of Deriz, as far as we know at least. We basically know no details about Classified apart from the fact that it's set in the Pentagon, which means that it's going to be a remake of 5, and I asked Jason myself, does Classified have a full-length Easter egg, and he refused to answer the question. So that probably means no, in my opinion at least. I doubt that he would refuse to answer it if the answer was yes, because why would he? He might as well hype up the map that he's making, right? So I think that Classified is going to be a quite straightforward experience, certainly for the gameplay, for the Easter eggs, for stuff like that. There'll be some in there for sure, just like Deriz, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as in-depth as Blood, but Classified's context will probably take a little bit of figuring out. Now, he then says, for casual players, and again, he's going back to that approach of really framing things for casual players instead of hardcore, which I'm not a massive fan of, to be honest, but he says, for casual players, you'd probably start with 9, so 9 is going to be a hella casual map, it sounds like, and then probably Blood, and then Voyage. And so he's saying that Voyage is essentially quite a cramped map. It's quite confined, because you're on the Titanic, and there's little narrow corridors and stuff, and as such, newer players might struggle with that sort of thing a little bit more, whereas 9 is much more broad, much more open, and so it's going to appeal to casual players more, I suppose. Now, one of the things that Lee Ross said when he was first promoting Infinite Warfare Zombies, when I interviewed him at Gamescom, he said, we are making the game easier for casual fans, and one of the first things that you do when you're making the game easier for a casual player, for a newbie player, is you make the spaces much bigger. And that's why in Spaceland, there's really open areas in that spawn and in that kind of first central area of the map. there's a lot of room to run around, and that was because Lee Ross was trying to make sure that the game was designed for casuals. It sounds like, from the other things that Jason says in the interview, 9 is designed with that same idea in mind. Bigger open areas, a brighter map so it's easier to see, easier to track things, and, therefore, a more casual experience. Now, he then says that the spatial complexity is different to the complexity of the main quest. And so what I think he's trying to say there, but not really articulating, or at least not articulating it very well, is that I think he's saying, even though that 9 is really open, and therefore not spatially complex, it still has a complicated Easter egg. And that is a good sign, for sure. That's definitely something that I am completely on board with. If he's taking the Lee Ross approach of saying, we're gonna make a tutorial mode and make this a bit more casual for the casual fans, fine, as long as the hardcore stuff is still there. That's the important thing. As long as there is the depth for those hardcore players, it doesn't matter if the map is easier, because the difficulty will come from the layers that they add on top. And it sounds like that's what he's trying to say here. That spatial complexity on 9 is very low, but the Easter egg complexity could still be different and therefore be higher. It does also mean, though, that Voyage, which has high spatial complexity, might have an easy quest. We don't know. So that's going to be something to figure out on launch, I guess. Moving on to, I think, our third point, I guess, out of about 5. Jason says that in terms of the storyline, and this is really interesting, the way that the Chaos story is going to operate will preserve the real-world events of history so that when we do have an outbreak, it will be cleaned up again. They're the words that he uses. It will be cleaned up again afterwards, and the true history of the world can continue as normal. So the example he kind of uses to illustrate this is as follows. He basically says, in the Chaos story, the trial is released. So that's when you plonk your little metal kind of, pencil into this circular disc plate thing. You stab the plate with the pencil, and out comes this gas, right? And it turns everyone into zombies, things go a bit crazy. That's a trial, which is really interesting. Aside from the rest of the stuff that I'm about to say, the fact that it's called a trial, like trials for our heroes, is a very mythology-inspired kind of piece of story content, I suppose. Narrative design, a framework, right? But the trial is released, and then he says the trial is either finished and completed, and therefore, I guess, the heroes are successful, or everybody dies and it's unsuccessful. And either way, it cleans everything up afterwards, and history is then preserved. I guess you could see this from a kind of cynical point of view as just a straightforward way for them to explain the fact that there's a mechanic in zombies, which is us spawning in, playing, dying, and spawning in all over again. And in terms of a story, that can be something a little bit difficult to grapple with. And they tried to do it in Black Ops 2, for example, with Richtofen moving the Victis crew across Earth, and that got horribly complicated, and ever since then it's been a bit of a nightmare, really, tracking those sorts of things, and they had to introduce Monty to explain away all these other game features that we, the fan base, were trying to explain ourselves using a kind of bastardized knowledge of what's actually in the story. And so I think Jason here is basically saying, don't worry guys, I've got a really neat, simple way for this to all make sense. You spawn in because you're attempting the trial, you die, you fail the trial, but you could just go and spawn in again and try the trial again. And that's just the way that's going to work. Now, point number 4, Jason says that the Chaos storyline is crazy, but he says that the Ether story is more like spaghetti, right? Whereas this new story, the Chaos story, is more like a building, fairly linear line of momentum that is then going to peak at the end of the DLC season. So, whereas in the past, we've had a little bit more of a kind of skittish storytelling approach, I suppose, a little bit more scattershot, this time, because they've got the benefit of foresight, the benefit of pre-planning and strategizing, they're going to be able to say, we're writing this story, we know the next 5 years of this story already, and so we can tell the first chapter of it over 4 maps as the DLC season, and will essentially, I guess, as well, then culminate in some crazy thing at the end, and then lead you into chapter 2 for the next game. That sounded like what he was basically saying there. Now, the last thing that I think's also really interesting is that he makes a point, and this isn't something that he's asked as part of the interview, but he makes a point of saying, we might not know, and in fact we will not know, why the map 9, or IX, is called 9 until 6 months to a year after release. And what that sounds like to me is that we're going to have to get to the end of the story in order to know what the beginning of that story even means. And this is very reminiscent of other stuff that Treyarch does. I mean, for example, in the Origins cutscene, we see the house, and we're like, what? Huh? What's going on there? And we only really started to get even a basic grasp of the significance of the house right at the end of Black Ops 3, when we were going to Revelations. And even then, it was still a bit of a mystery. And so, I think that he's basically pulling that same card here, the magician is reusing his trick, and saying, for us, we're going to have a map called 9, but no reason for it to be called 9 until we get to the end of the story. He reveals that there are like 9 serpent gods that are controlling the multiverse, and they are secretly controlling the ancient order of people that we're fighting against in the Colosseum. Her, blur, der. It'll be something like that, but we won't know that that's the case until we get to the end of it all. Or at least that sounds like what he's trying to say. So, what do you think of all this, guys? I think that it's a mixed bag. A lot of this is really, really positive. Like, just the fact that he's trying to make it clear that, yes, he's designing things for a bit of a more casual audience, but there is still depth there. Like, he's trying to squeeze those things into what he's saying, and I appreciate that for sure. So that's good. I also like the fact that we are going to have these 2 concurrent stories of one big bowl of spaghetti and then one actual somewhat linear chain of momentum. The only thing that worries me about that is that he hasn't conveyed any concrete information about how the DLC season is going to work. And so for all we know, because all we know is that we're getting 4 DLC maps in the Black Ops Pass. That's all we know. And so we don't actually know if what he's going to do is release these 4 maps on disc and then only do 4 more Chaos Story maps and just leave the Ether story until maybe like a Zombies Chronicles 2 or something. We don't know if that's his plan. And if that is his plan, I can foresee that being very problematic, because as much as I'm willing to give the Chaos story a really strong push, I really like the setup that they've got for it so far, and as such, I'm excited to cover it on my channel. I think that there are going to be a lot of people out there that do not have any patience with it. And that's fine. I don't think that you owe Treyarch any patience whatsoever in seeing that Chaos story and giving them the benefit of the doubt that it might get better or anything like that. You don't owe them that by any means. And so, if we end up getting a Chaos-dominant DLC season, things might get a little bit rocky. But if they go 2 and 2, it might be okay. But then we might feel like we've just made no progress in any story in Black Ops 4, and we certainly won't get to a very high peak if there's only 3 or I guess it's going to be 4 maps for Chaos, and so that might feel kind of weak as well. Like, it's a difficult situation for Treyarch. Honestly, the only way that I can see it working really perfectly is if they do 8 DLC maps, and they just do 2 season passes. They do the Black Ops pass, and then they do like a Zombies pass after or something with even more maps, like an extra story map per DLC, and then also, I don't know, like some remasters. They chuck in, not 5 remastered, but they chuck in Call of the Dead, one of the maps, and then they chuck in some other map they haven't remastered. Those sorts of things. Maybe that would help it a little bit, just because then we get further into the stories, and we'd have to worry less about kind of getting a bit stagnant, and also having to wait like 4 months for another installment in the Ether story if they alternate the different stories that they touch on. It's a tough one for Treyarch. I don't know how they're going to sort it, but hopefully we'll get some info soon. This is not going to be my last Black Ops 4 Zombies video today. Like I said, I've already posted that one about the Zombie Rush mode. I'm going to be doing one more about support for the game, and the way in which they're going to be releasing content throughout the year, I guess, compared to their approaches in the past. That will be going up as soon as I can get it uploaded to my channel, so click on the screen somewhere, because it'll be there at some point if it's been uploaded by now. Otherwise, though, thanks for watching, subscribe, hit the bell, turn on notifications. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.